Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of AI Talks. I'm your host, Avi, and with me is Gib Bassett. Hey, Gib.
Hi, Abby. How are you?
Good to see you. Now, we've been talking a little bit about the role of AI in organizations, small, medium, large. They really have fundamentally different attributes and characteristics, but there are some parts that are very common and consistent. And so today we really want to talk about the theme of how to design an effective strategy and systems and processes for success with AI in an organization. Right. So are we going to focus a little bit on the culture of an organization? What is good leadership and how to get beyond the typical business numeric ROI and go deeper and broader so that the solutions and impact are felt across the organization in a very positive way. So to discuss this, I brought in an expert. Our guest today is Pedro Domit. Pedro is a growth-focused executive, a transformational leader, a serial entrepreneur, and he's played a pivotal role in establishing TracFone as a leading prepaid wireless company in the US. I've personally seen his journey and his leadership, where he spearheaded the strategic initiatives that really propelled TracFone's exponential growth to more than 20 million customers and $8 billion in revenue by 2021. Pedro and I have worked together. He had both the customer experience and the data science portfolio. He championed customer-centric culture. He was very focused on leveraging data to enhance the customer experience and their value, and consequently led to the historically low customer churn at TracFone. So his leadership really added more than $9 billion to value to TracFone through efficiencies and innovation. So he speaks fluent English and Spanish. So if you are Spanish speakers who are interested, reach out and say hi, hola to Pedro. And we'll talk a little bit about his experiences all throughout his career. Thank you so much for joining us, Pedro. Welcome to AI Talks.
Oh, thank you, Abby, and thank you, Gabe. It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully, I can add some value to this conversation, and we can have a little bit of fun while we do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, Pedro's a really fun guy. Get some tequila, a bottle of tequila, and him together, and talk about soccer, and he's all fun. So, but but sadly, no
Sometimes.
tequila on AI Talks today. We should do another episode with just tequila on the
I like
side.
that.
There
Let's
you
do it.
go.
So,
Very good.
Pedro, leadership is super important. I've seen your leadership style firsthand, and I've been very fortunate to learn from you some of the hallmarks of a good leader. But when you look at leadership within an organization perspective, right? When you're an organization that's going through transformation, there are certain things that are very important for those leaderships, that kind of leader who brings that transformation in, and particularly in the space of AI and data science, where it's having a transformation across the organizations of every industry. In your experience, what do you think are really good characteristics of such a transformational leader?
Look, Abby, I think the first one is to acknowledge and understand what you don't know. No, because I think this AI space is relatively new.
Mhm.
There's a lot of buzz around it, and sometimes we feel like we know about it. So realizing that you really don't know in depth what you should know, I think, is the first step that you need to take. No,
Mhm.
From there you need to build, I think, a team that will. A team of experts, a team that will know how to guide you through this space. It's a little bit of what we did in my previous role when I was running AI and machine learning along with customer experience. Um, I brought someone that was an expert that could help me drive that change. Then it comes to or the next step is to do an assessment of where you are, where the organization is, and so in a lot of cases there's a lot of data-driven organizations, and others there's a lot of gut feeling driven organizations. No? And so understanding that current environment will allow you then as a leader to start defining the steps of creating that culture that you're looking for.
Mhm.
And then listening. I think a lot of listening, a lot of empathy, and you'll hear me talk about empathy a lot. I'm a big proponent of design thinking. So understanding and then socializing with the different areas in the organization about what AI can do for them, in layman terms, because that's the other part. There's a lot of technical jargon. So
Mhm.
someone that can translate that very complex subject into something that I, as the HR leader or as the financial analyst, can understand how this is going to benefit my day-to-day job. So I think those are some of the traits that are important in starting a new AI transformation within an organization.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, fantastic. Gib, you had a thought?
Pedro, when at TracFone, as you took them on that journey, how did you, and you can describe it generally, how did you make sure to stay on track throughout that entire process? Because obviously the challenge is that over time, the company's conditions change, the people change, and now with generative AI, things are moving so quickly, and at the same time, people need to be carried along without getting too bogged down in lots of misunderstandings. So I'm just curious, like, did you do anything unique to really carry things through so that people didn't start perceiving risk or worry, like your direct, the people that you reported to worry that like, this is like, what's going on here? This is like taking too long, or I'm not quite sure what's happening. To make sure that people maintain confidence in the program.
yeah. I think it's about setting expectations. I think that that is very important. When we went through that transformation at TracFone, what we see today with ChatGPT and all of this generative AI was not really a play. So it was a little bit more of a buzzword at the time. But I think with my leader, which was an amazing leader, setting up the right expectations, understanding that's the important part of understanding where you are, not just culturally, but also technologically. At the time, we did not have a data lake, so it was about bringing in all of these different and disparate pieces of information, defining how we were going to store information for our customers. What was the vision of doing this, and a little bit of what Eduardo, my boss at the time, and I discussed, and this is the reason it ended up together with customer experiences. How do we use AI into the future to differentiate us from the competition? At the end, telecom today is how do you say, a generic
Commodity.
commodity,
Yeah.
right? We all sell the same, or we all used to say, and I don't no longer do that, but sell the square piece of glass, and the network might be different, but it's really depending on where you're moving, and the plans and the pricing is very similar. So the only thing that can differentiate you is that customer experience. So how do you use the data, which was a little bit of an evolution from previous predictive models that we had tried in a different age and a different era, which were more focused on how do I sell more things to my current customers? How do I get an extra 5 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents of ARPU out of a customer, to truly transforming it and saying, how can I give more value to my customer based on the information and the data that I have? At the end, it's about setting up the right expectations, understanding that this is not a flip a switch and we're done, and now all of a sudden we are predicting what you're doing tomorrow morning. So
I mean, I personally like how you summarized it by kind of describing the business model as sort of being generic, and then how customer experience, really how you treat the customer, differentiates and helps you sell. Therefore, customer experience and analytics, AI, machine learning should go together hand in hand. And so setting expectations around the impact that can have versus 10 years ago when you may have used data to try to predict churn, but perhaps in a much less sophisticated manner or in a more batch-oriented mode, and it was not as real time or as efficient or as accurate as it could be today. Like, very succinctly, for that business and that industry, that makes it very clear how it works. I'm just trying to think, like, in a traditional retail environment or in insurance, some industries are more data driven than others, but that's really, I think, a nice way of summarizing it, I think.
thank you.
Yeah, and one of the key points there, Pedro, was about how data science AI group didn't sit under IT, right? I know you and Eduardo really thought about it. Can you talk to why you felt it was more suitable to be under customer experience and not just another IT department?
I think it was the vision of this all-encompassing customer experience, and it was really about making investments that are not necessarily seen in the short term. It's very easy to see when you added an extra 10 cents of ARPU to a group of customers. Sometimes when you're looking at churn, which is really where the value will come if they stay not 1 or 2 or 3 months more, you're adding a lot more than just 10 cents for those customers. No? So I think it was a little bit of that vision, and let's make sure that we don't fall in the short termism, right, and trying to get those 10 cents and getting desperate. No? And in any other of the areas, since each one would look at it on a very specific perspective, no, finance would be looking probably for those 10 cents, or operations would be looking at how to make the calls more efficient, or a supply chain as to how to make the most efficient way of or use of the inventory. All of those things are small parts of that customer experience. So if depending on when you or where you set this organization, then you're going to have different perspectives and different visions based on that leadership. When you have a group that's responsible for all of the customer experience, regardless of the stage, then it's looking at the holistic view of that customer and making sure that everybody's playing the right role and making the investments where the best bang for your buck will come.
That's an interesting point, because I've noticed in the past there's been a tremendous focus on the low hanging fruit, low hanging fruit. Let's just get some quick wins and quick wins, which is really orientated to help sell the value of a program or initiative in AI to leadership. But what you're talking about is stepping back and looking at a very strategic perspective as a long term vision, because we know AI and machine learning and data science can add value. So you no longer have to make a business case to demonstrate, oh, there's a quick ROI, but there is benefit in thinking more strategically for a long-term investment.
Yep, absolutely, without a doubt, and that's part of the leadership part that you were asking on your first question is how do you maintain the trust into the future that we're really moving forward? And I think having certain steps or checkpoints in the way helps in that perspective. No? At least we know we moved from point A to point B, so we're on the right track, and being able to communicate that to the stakeholders and to your boss at the end of the day. No, at the end, Eduardo could have decided to cancel this and move it to IT in any second. He was very clear of the direction we were taking, and so I think that's the reason we ended up where it ended. No?
I was going to say quick about so when you were doing this at TracFone, I imagine you're trying to roll it out across the company, and you mentioned metrics and supply chain. You mentioned other departments that would be using analytics traditionally, and you would be looking 5 cents here, 25 cents here, but even more in some other cases. So improving performance in different functions. So in an ideal case, the leaders in each area of your business probably would all have equivalent understanding and knowledge of what you were doing and maintain that pace with you. But in reality, they're probably all at variable levels of expertise and excitement with you. So among those different departments, I think maybe just for the audience, it'd be interesting to know from your perspective in a telecom, mobile sort of wireless, business, which among those leaders was the most, excited and conversant and keeping pace versus the ones that maybe were lagging and needed more help, just because, you have limited bandwidth and you need to spend more time with other people. And it also informs, like, Abby was saying, like the prioritization of where you focus, and hopefully in strategic areas.
So I think supply chain was one of the first ones in this space. The cost of the inventory of devices, of handsets, is very high. And so having a device sitting down at a Walmart for 6 months is a very bad investment at the end of the day. So I think the leader from that area was one of the ones that was first to jump into the space. We actually created a specific data lake, or not the data lake, but one record specific to devices, so that we will be able to track those devices from beginning to end. We were working with everybody. Of course, there's areas that tend to lag a little bit more, but in marketing, there's always a space of a little bit of more gut feeling than data driven in some cases. But we were taking them along for the ride, and I think they were ready to jump in the bandwagon.
No, I think that's super interesting, because I'm sure in the back of your mind, whether it was formal or not, you're thinking through that process of the different leaders, whether it's in supply chain or marketing, and you want to bring everybody along, but they all are going to kind of come at their own pace, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yes, and look, I think if you can show small wins as well as you're moving forward, and there were a couple of initiatives that we did, one with churn, where we analyzed one of the underlying operators that were selling us service. and their impact, the impact of their network to churn. And it was a really eye-opening exercise, I think, for everybody involved now. So.
And this may be a minute detail, but when you said that you created kind of not a data lake, but a sort of data space specifically for supply chain to support the urgent opportunity there, IT obviously had to be involved potentially because they were provisioning or providing that. And any sort of special secret sauce to negotiating that, because the IT leadership was probably saying, is this going to happen in every single case? Because this is going to get a little crazy. Are we going for a single version of the truth across the enterprise? You're creating all these distinct subject areas. Is that a problem? I'm just curious, like, did that even occur?
So it's interesting because I think I had a very good relationship with the leader of IT, which made our life, I think, a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a joint effort between the two, even though the responsibility fell in my shoes. The collaboration we had between the teams was incredible. And so a lot of the data lake effort and a lot of the data engineering effort was really done by IT, but led by us, no, led by the customer experience team, and the data scientists would fall under our organization. Yes, it's difficult. At the beginning, we started with a single view and a single source. It was more customer driven since we were the customer experience. It was more focused on customer experience, but quickly we saw other opportunities. Device was one of the which follows a different life cycle than the customer. It starts even before the customer becomes a customer. No, you have a device that's going to be manufactured, that's going to be sold, that's going to be moved into the store, so on and so forth. And we also saw an opportunity at some point to do the same with the customer service agents. And so creating a repository or a single view of each one of those agents, trying to get to the point, and unfortunately we did not finish on that part before the acquisition of TracFone. But the idea was to have or understand which agents would be great at solving particular problems, and then trying to do intelligent routing for agents to be able to receive those type of calls. And so if you can imagine, if you're a customer or even an agent and you're always receiving the calls that you're very good at solving, it also changes your perspective on your job. And so that the concept was that would help us also increase employee satisfaction.
Yeah, that was a really important part of Pedro's vision, I remember, right? Firstly, the golden customer record, the golden device record, the golden retailer record, all of these allow different views of the same data. Like, so you're still working from the same truth, but the difference is it's sort of having a view, because every operations has its own metrics it needs to hit. But the key thing, which I think, Pedro, I remember, which was very, very different from other perspectives and other leadership that I've encountered, was your focus on not just customer experience, but employee experience in designing and organizing. Talk to me a little bit about how did this come about and where are the roots of this?
So when I was asked to create the customer experience department, which did not exist at the time, of course, I was not an expert on it, so I needed to read and to learn a lot about it. No? And there was one phrase that I read in a book that stuck with me, which is that your customer experience will never be better than your employee experience. And when I read that, I was like, we're not even measuring our employee experience. I know we're measuring our customer experience, but how do we start measuring our employee experience? And so that was a very interesting path. We basically took the same approach to customer experience. We implemented employee NPS, and the questions were, would you recommend your friends and family to work for this company? Why yes and why not? And it was very interesting. I think the first iteration we did, we were like at -20, our employee NPS, and by a year later, I think we were at +20. So it was a 40-point swing, which was, it gave us a lot of focus, no? And then the organization bought into this idea that we're going to improve the experience of our customers if we're able to improve the experience of our employees. And we basically use the same methodology to solve problems. We were using design thinking. And so it was the same on the customer experience side. We became a design thinking shop after we created the customer experience group.
That would be a good topic for a book for you to write, Pedro, because that's, I think, an overlooked aspect of a lot of this stuff, particularly now that generative AI is sucking all the air out of the room. You just can't layer that across the enterprise and go. I mean, there's a debate from on one end, it replaces workers, to it complements and improves their productivity, to it's autonomous, et cetera. So however that's going to apply to a business or an institution, it's going to be helpful to, to do that. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
There's also sort of a fear around it. Like you pointed out, like how AI and people are scared of it, but also fascinated by it, right? People are afraid of their jobs. What am I going to do? I mean, just the other day, I was, I was able to type something very quickly and generate a graphic that was so impressive that somebody would have spent half a day to do. And so what happens is now organizations can see this as a threat, or they can see it as just a cash cow opportunity. But in reality, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? And
Yes.
so if you are too focused on just, hey, I want to automate and get rid of heads, then you're perhaps missing the chance and the opportunity, because there's a phenomenal amount of talent and knowledge and domain expertise in the minds of the people who are working for a company. Now you just
Mm-hmm.
enhance them with AI capabilities. Now you've turned them into superheroes. So
Yep.
if your mindset is about getting rid of heads, that's not a very productive way. What do you think, Pedro?
Well, I think that the challenge of organizations today is about preparing the workforce for what comes,
Hmm.
right? I think we all know AI and and machine learning and all this space is here to stay. And if we don't understand or prepare our workforce to be able to use it, then we're missing an opportunity. So there was probably an overused quote, and I don't even know who said it, but it said something to the effect of AI will not replace your job. Someone that knows how to use AI will replace your job, right? And I think that's the case in many of these spaces. So really, I think as the leadership of organizations and as organizations, it is to a certain extent our responsibility to prepare this workforce for what comes next. How are we going to best utilize the human element into what we have? I mean, there was a time back in the early 2000s where we thought 100% of the people were going to use IVR, and that was the best automation in the world, and people were really frustrated with that. No, so I'm sure that as we move forward and AI starts taking over, there'll still be frustration
Mhm.
in some cases. No? So the human element, I think, it's always going to remain. So preparing them, Avi, is the answer.
Yeah. Let's talk about a little bit about um, the short wins along the way and decision making, right? Because AI
Mhm.
can be very, very risky proposition, and data science driven decision making. While you've got evidence, but changing and manipulating the experience of customers can have a very positive effect, also a negative effect. Talk to me a little bit about how you see experimentation part of that equation when you're sort of building a culture of design thinking, working backwards for employee and customers. What is the role of experimentation in that space?
It's key. I mean, is the key to making it successful at the end of the day. No, and this there's a great article from a human from Harvard Business Review. I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and it called the culture of experimentation. I believe was the topic of the whole issue of Harvard Business Review that month. And it's interesting. It talked about the example or the use case of Booking.com, if I remember correctly. Booking at the time was doing, I think, something like 25,000 experiments per year. And the meat of the article was that it was not so much about technology, it was much more about empowerment. So when you talk about the culture of experimentation, we need to understand how free are our employees to make their own decisions and to create their own tests within a set of guardrails, right? You don't want to throw away a 90% discount to 100% of your customers all of a sudden. So there needs to be some guardrails, but you need to have that ability for any employee, because this was the other interesting part about Booking. It was any employee could make or start an experiment at any point in time. Also, I remember Avi and I had that discussion back then, and we were saying, okay, we need to design a system where if the guy from the warehouse wants to run an experiment, he has enough tools, easy to use, that they can run their own experiment. And then work on the culture to create that space where it's easy to do. You don't have to ask a lot of permissions to get it done. And it's easy to measure at the end, because at the end, the whole point of experimentation is what was the difference between what I was trying to do or what I was expecting will happen and what actually happened. And did it actually work? You know? So I think, Avi, more than anything, of course, you need certain tools to be able to do that. But at the end, it's about the culture that you create in that organization and how much fail fast is embedded into the culture of the company. You know, it goes a little bit against everything I learned when I was in school, and also in the first years of my career. But then after when I realized that I was the biggest proponent of it, so I was the first one celebrating all the failures.
And I like to look at it as learn fast as opposed
Yeah.
to fail fast, right? Learn as quickly as you can with each experiment, and you try. The key part is that cultural evolution.
Sorry,
Like,
Abby, but
Mhm.
I have to interrupt you there, because I even though, yes, it's about learning fast,
Mhm.
but we need to get comfortable with the word fail. I mean,
Mhm.
it's something that it has a very bad connotation.
Mhm.
I think all three of us have been in the workforce for many times, and we've all had a lot of failures. And those failures have been the best thing that happened to us, because we learned a lot and we moved forward. No, if we go back and we didn't have those, so yes, it's about the learning. But I do think that organizations need to cope and to start getting comfortable with the word failure. It's okay to fail, right? Have guardrails. Try to make small mistakes. Don't go for don't try to boil the ocean. But you do need to get comfortable with that. No?
That's a really good point. You need to destigmatize the notion of what failure means, right?
Yeah.
So there is greater risk taking and greater the part. Gib, you've worked with a lot of organizations in your role to advise and consult and strategize. Are you familiar with other examples where experimentation could have saved the day for the organization, but they chose not to, being conservative?
Well, it's not even being conservative. It's just that I think everybody wants certainty around any sort of anything, right? And so in business, as it relates to data and analytics projects, then you're being pitched something from a vendor, or you're doing it internally, trying to scope a project. It's all about what outcome are we trying to achieve, and then how do we justify investing the resources to do it. And it's always focusing on some sort of problem that we want to solve. But rarely is it the problem that's attempting to be solved, implementing a culture or an idea of experimentation within a function. It's really much more around a specific problem,
Mhm.
which it raises the stakes exponentially in terms of the risk, and then the person that's going to back it in terms of standing behind it. They want to have absolute certainty, and that's the way procurement for technology and software has existed forever, right? And so, in many respects, part of this culture of analytics, it's really important to do that. I used to work with a chief data officer who used to advocate for allowing sort of the users to kind of self-discover their use cases. And like you said, Pedro, it's a little bit like experimentation. It's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
counter to everything that you learned. Like, I would want to prioritize the use cases based on potential business value and figure out level of effort versus value, and then prioritize these things this way, and then make sure we're measuring from a baseline. And I think you still can do that in the environment of experimentation. But I think that with the absolute certainty that there will be failures, and that knowing that that's the case, it should lower the hurdle to do some work. But it is kind of counterintuitive, and it's got to be probably one of the sticking points. And in part, it's because, again, coming from the vendor side, software companies are trying to sell you guys stuff. I want to sell you something that's going to give you business value, right? So I'm going to tell you you can go ahead and reduce churn, better than you do today. You're going to enable more people to do it, because you're going to give you visual no-code tools to democratize the analytics behind those sorts of things, bring people along the journey from where they're doing things today in SQL to being able to maybe think about a machine learning model and the like. But the reality of it is that, to do that really well, it takes just a different sort of mindset, because otherwise the hurdle is just going to be way too high, and you don't necessarily need software to do that. You have to have this culture of experimentation and be willing to take some risks, and think about projects more in that context. So I mean, I don't have a specific example of that, but that's sort of the way my response to that. And I think that's a huge issue. I mean, I think if you talk to Tom Davenport or Randy Bean, the guys behind the New Wave Partners annual CDO research, Pedro, you may or may not be subject to that survey, or you may not be familiar with it, but it always talks about culture and organizational and leadership considerations as the number one inhibitor to being more data driven and getting more value from analytics and now AI. And I think a significant portion of that probably is the fact that experimentation is just it's counterintuitive to business 101 to a lot of people, and when in fact it's got to be fundamental, especially in light of, and we don't have to talk about this right now, but with generative AI, people that are starting to research this and start to understand that there's not absolute certainty behind how that always operates. And so it's almost in every sort of interaction with the generative AI system, maybe like an experiment unto itself, which is kind of a hard thing for people to even understand. But yet it's behind, OpenAI's massive valuation, and represents a huge opportunity. So I just think that that's a huge, huge issue. Probably that would be another good book to write about.
Lots of book ideas. But
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about the culture part of it, right? So cultural transformations are hard. They're not easy. They go taking a learned practice behavior of an organization, because culture is a function of different behaviors combined together, how people do, to a new space. How do you think organizations should embark on that journey, Pedro? Like, what do they need to do?
I think each organization will be different. No, you need to understand the current culture and the current cultural trends that move the organization, which might or might not look what what the C-suite think it looks like. No, so without understanding the current state, it's difficult to have a recipe that works for every company. In our case, I think it was pretty clear where the breakpoints were, even before we talk about AI and before we talk about customer experience. There were certain elements of that behavior that we had that were not necessarily collaborative within the organization. No? So there was a lot of things that we did. I think having clear values that come from the base up, from the employees up, and also not necessarily top down. I think having a clear purpose that makes you feel good at the end of the day. What are we trying to do, and how are we going to leave this world a little bit of a better place than what we found it? I think that starts to point everybody into the same direction, and then you start getting a lot more collaboration. And then some more tactical things like design thinking. For us, design thinking was a big catalyst of that cultural change. And it was just the way we decided to implement it in the workshops that we did. And it was interesting because I wanted the design thinking workshop to be mandatory for everybody in the organization. It was a 3-day workshop, and my boss said, "There's no way I'm going to make this mandatory." So you tried to convince people to go, and it was very interesting because after 2 years, we actually trained like 80% of the organization on design thinking, and it was really word of mouth and people talking about what we were doing. I think what design thinking helped us to do were a couple of things. One, people started realizing that they were a lot more creative than what they thought. So you had people in accounting or in HR who had never been exposed to this space of creativity. Second, I think it helped us blur the lines between the silos between the different organizations. So it was about having within a team solving a very specific problem. We decided to make that problem nothing related to our business. It was actually redesigning the zoo experience out of all things. And then so that nobody would have any biases, right? It's about learning the methodology. But it started to create some relationships between people in accounting, with people in finance, with people in operations, with people in sales that had never worked together. So all of a sudden they had someone that they already knew in finance that they could pick up the phone and ask them a question. And then we also encouraged all levels of the organization to be part of this workshop. So in some cases, we had C-suite members sitting down with someone in accounting or someone from customer service. And that helped us blur the organizational chart lines. So there was no vertical. Now I had direct access to the CMO to go and ask him a question because I met him in my table at the design thinking workshop. And it was very interesting because after we had a good mass of maybe 30%, people would come into my office or and say, you know what, we want to try to solve this particular problem using design thinking, and can we create a group? These were people that were not part of my organization, and they would build a multidisciplinary team to go and solve problems. So I think it takes time, Abby. It's very easy to fall back when you have a little bit of pressure on the organization. We tend to fall back to the behaviors that made us successful in the past. There was a great video, and if you want to look at it, it's about a backwards bicycle.
Mhm.
I think if you look in YouTube backwards bicycle, you'll find it, and it's this guys that build a bicycle for another guy, and when you turn the wheel to the left, it turns the other way, and so it's a very interesting video, but it talks about how we have all of these mental structures and mental processes already structured, and we'll follow it to the T. We learn something new. We need to be intentional, and we need to practice it every day until it becomes a new habit. And it's very easy to fall back when you have a little bit of pressure on the organization. So I think you were part of a lot of these changes, Abby, and you when you came in, we were starting with this transformation. When you left, we were halfway there. I would say we were missing probably 1 or 2 years or 3 years maybe to have it solid.
No, it's a fantastic experience and journey, because and design thinking was fundamentally, an important tool for people to change their behaviors,
Mhm.
change their mindset, how to approach it. So it became a very much empathy driven approach to problem solving, and that's one of the parts where most organizations don't understand. The role of AI isn't an algorithm, isn't a box, isn't some code. The role of AI is only effective if you work backwards from the customer or the employee or the process. And if you can
Mhm.
understand those things, then you can bring in the right AI, because there's too many different AI tools. It's not a plug and play, right? And
Yes.
so understanding where the value is starts with the customer, starts with the employee, and working backwards, and building that cross-disciplinary team is very, very important. I don't think many organizations get that right. There's always divides and who knows what or what organization. And if you can sort of level set that as in terms of creating a culture that doesn't matter which discipline you're part of, nothing about AI, but you can get involved in using
Mhm.
AI. That
Mhm.
changes the the style of it. But that also comes down to how you communicate the value of these things to the organization. Any tips for the listeners on how they would even build, position some of these endeavors for an organization?
I follow design thinking. I think is my best advice that I can give. Go and empathize with the internal customers, understand what their pain points are,
Mhm.
and then create your solution or your proposal around those pain points. No, I think we tend too many times we tend not only from an AI perspective, but in companies in general, we tend to think we know the answers because we know better, and we forget that there's human behind our products and buying our products, and that we really should go and ask them what their true pain points are, and it's really getting to that emotional pain point, or that deep pain point, not just staying in the surface of I can't do A or I can't do B. What does that end up generating? Well, if I can't do A and I can't do B, the real pain point might be that you don't have enough time to spend with your family because you can't do A and B. And so now you understand how to craft your solution to go and sell that AI product or that AI solution to that team.
Yeah.
So design thinking is the beginning and the end of everything, Abby.
So strong advocate of design thinking. If you haven't done design thinking, go do the course, because it's really worthwhile. And it's a good experience, and you'll change the way you look at problems, how to
Mhm.
approach them. Let's talk a little bit about all you talked about design thinking, you talk about experimentation, you talked about creating a culture.
Mhm.
How do leaders who are looking to build an organization and build the culture of an organization, all that, should approach these endeavors? Do they spin up a dedicated team? Do they, have to get buy-in from executives? Do you have to set aside budget for this? Some, ABCs of getting started on this. What do you think?
So it depends on what you're thinking about. If you're thinking as a small group within the organization and trying to establish this new culture, it becomes very difficult. You can have a small subculture within your as an organization,
Mhm.
but really, for an organizational change of that magnitude, to change the way we operate, to change the way about we think about things, to change the way we interact with each other, it really has to start with the top. The top has to buy in into this is where we want to go. No, if the
Mhm.
CEO, the board does not believe in this, this is the right thing to do, then it's very easy. You'll start, but you'll never finish. So I think that's the first part. The second part is and where I think, or I see a lot of organizations fail in cultural transformations is we believe sometimes that it should be top down, right? So even though the top has to have a buy-in, the actual construction of that culture, if you want it to stay, if you want it to be perdurable, should be created from the bottoms up. And it's about understanding what is already there. You have certain currents in there, even though, for example, in my previous organization, maybe at the beginning we didn't have a lot of collaboration between departments. I'm talking about department heads. When you would look at the undercurrents, there was always the guy that had the connection with the other group, and they would get together and never tell the leaders and then just get things done. So understanding what those behaviors are at that level, and then crafting or creating that new culture along with the organization or with the people, then you can create something that's perdurable. And then beyond that, it's about the execution.
Mhm.
No, so what I've seen in my experience at TracFone, you see right away people that say, "Oh, I love this new concept. This new culture is incredible. We need to buy in," and you have a small percent that jump in right away. You have probably another much larger percent that will say, "You know what? This is the flavor of the month. Let's wait a couple of months and see what maybe they will forget about this change and we'll go back to operating the way we are. But for now, let's just stay in the sidelines." Basically, what they're doing. And then you probably have another small percent that say, "This is the most stupid idea I've heard in my life. I'm going to prove to everybody that this is the wrong path to take." And so those are the naysayers. There's a tipping point, and I think there's even there must be an algorithm to calculate the tipping point. But there's a tipping point where after X amount, X percent of the companies already living that new culture, then that 80, what used to be 80%, of naysayers or staying, in the sidelines, all of a sudden start to jump in with 2 feet, and that's when the culture will permeate and will stay. And at that point, the other 10% probably will never get used to this new culture, and then it's about having tough decisions as to, is this the right place for you to work, not only from the perspective of the company, but even from the perspective of the employee. That not all cultures are for everybody, no? So
Mhm.
I hope that answers the question, Abby.
No, it's fantastic, fantastic. Gabe?
So Pedro, at TracFone, when you speak of culture, are you speaking of the corporate culture in general sense, or specific data driven culture? I suspect it's the former, culture in general, being customer centric, and that, obviously better data analytic practices embraced by more people is fundamental to that. But I asked that question just because, you know, there's not multiple cultures. You know what I mean? There's
No,
culture, right? Exactly, right. I'm just curious.
there's a corporate culture, and then the experimentation culture, as an example, is a
Yeah,
subset, a sub product of the culture overall.
Mhm.
When you have the right corporate culture and it leads to collaboration, it's a lot easier to have a lot of experimentation, or to create that culture of experimentation,
yeah.
because then you wouldn't be asking me, how was that interaction with IT when you were trying to create these things, right? Because we already have that corporate culture of collaboration.
Thank you, because that is not a fine point. Because when vendors and thought leaders and other experts talk about data driven culture, they don't often talk about it in that way. They talk about it being data driven and more so and the like, as if it's a unique and separate, maybe connected to a broader charter. but it's really fundamental to that. And so I think that's a really important point. Not that this makes it that much harder and challenging. It may or may not, but it's just important to think about it that way, because it's not a data and analytics or a technology thing. Those are just like supporting of being that way.
And that's the key point, Gib, that most organizations fail to recognize. They see data analytics, AI as a bolt-on tool on the side, and then they're trying to drive organizational change. In reality, what you need is the organization culture to pull in AI as a tool to serve its purposes, right? What is its vision and goal? And that's not easy to do. And that's why, like, even at Berryjam, we start with AI readiness assessments for organizations. We help them do workshops to plan out their course and what they should do, because that particular part is the hardest part to get right when you're going. It's easy to get some code or easy to get a model and patch it up and build it, but to make a lasting organizational impact, you need to start both with the leadership and the methodologies and processes and day-to-day design thinking, agile mindsets, experimentation, fast iterations, and as Pedro, you said, allow people to fail within guardrails so that failure is not seen as a stigma. So look, I want to bring this back home. You've talked about lots of interesting things here, and you've shared some interesting stories. I've been there, and hopefully the audience gets get a taste of it. But I guess that if it was one key takeaway you would you share with the audience on how they should think about creating a culture for AI adoption and data driven, what would you say, Pedro?
One thing, Abby, that's a that's a very complex subject, but I think it comes down to having the right culture and organizing the right team, and then setting the right expectations. No, to me, you can do all of these things if you follow the design thinking methodology, because then you will get it right from the beginning. From why are we building this? For whom are we building this? Does it make sense to the people that we are building this for, right? And then what are the expectations forward? But I think those are the key elements to creating this new space of AI into a lasting, not the flavor of the month, not the hype of the year. It's about creating sustainable change towards the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Pedro. Really appreciate your words of wisdom. There's always phenomenal insights when we have a conversation.
Always for me as well, Abby. You know that.
Oh, wonderful.
And very nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you, Pedro. Appreciate it.
So, if you're listening to this and you want to reach out to Pedro or myself, or Gib, don't hesitate. Just send us a note. All the details will be in the description. And we'll see you next time for the next episode of AI Talks. Thanks, everyone.